Will I ever feel happy again after antidepressants? Coming off antidepressants can sometimes leave people wondering if they'll ever feel happiness, motivation, or joy again. When depression and emotional numbness appear after stopping antidepressants, it can be frightening and confusing. In this blog, I share my own experience of anhedonia, depression, and protracted antidepressant withdrawal, and why healing taught me that there was far more to my story than simply needing psychiatric drugs forever. Recently, someone shared a question with me that I know many people silently carry. They had successfully come off antidepressants but were feeling deeply depressed. They asked me how I'm able to be off antidepressants and not feel the same way. They worried that after taking antidepressants for so many years, their brain would no longer know how to produce the feel-good chemicals on its own. They wondered whether this was the reason so many people end up returning to psychiatric drugs. As soon as I read their message, I felt a deep sense of understanding because I remember having exactly the same fears and asking the same questions. I remember wondering whether I had permanently damaged myself. I remember questioning whether my brain would ever function normally again. Most of all, I remember wondering whether happiness, joy, and motivation had disappeared from my life forever. My experience of depression during withdrawal. When I was first prescribed antidepressants, I was a teenager struggling with anxiety, depression, trauma, and the emotional challenges that came with that period of my life. During the nearly 20 years I took antidepressants, I also experienced episodes of depression from time to time, despite being on a full dose. However, nothing prepared me for the depression and anhedonia I experienced during withdrawal. It felt completely different. The darkness was deeper. The hopelessness felt more consuming. It was though my mind had been taken over by fear, despair, and negativity. I lost interest in everything. I couldn't do the career that I once loved. I stopped caring about hobbies and interests. Socializing became exhausting and extremely challenging. Activities that had previously brought comfort or enjoyment felt meaningless. There was no excitement, no anticipation, no motivation, no joy. My entire focus became survival. I often found myself asking questions such as, is this who I really am without antidepressants? What if this never changes? What if I never feel happiness again? What if I need antidepressants for the rest of my life? Those thoughts terrified me because at the time they felt completely believable. What helped keep me going? Looking back, there were two things that kept me moving forward when I could barely see any hope for myself. The first was my family and friends. Their love for me and my love for them became the anchor and reason that kept me going when everything else felt impossible and I wanted to give up. The second was success stories. I became almost obsessed with reading success stories from people who had survived antidepressant withdrawal. I searched for them constantly because I needed proof that what I was experiencing wasn't permanent. I needed to know that other people had felt the same darkness and still found their way back to themselves. The more stories I read, the more my understanding began to change. I started to recognize that my nervous system had been through an enormous amount. After nearly 2 decades of antidepressant use, multiple drug changes, failed tapering attempts, and a final taper that I later realized had been too fast, it made sense that the injury to my body and mind wasn't going to recover overnight. Slowly, I began to believe that perhaps I could heal too. The challenge of protracted withdrawal. One of the hardest things about antidepressant withdrawal is the uncertainty that comes with time. When symptoms continue for months or even years, doubt naturally creeps in. Whenever those waves arrived and doubt grew, the questions returned. What if this isn't withdrawal? What if I'm waiting for something that isn't going to happen? What if this is simply who I am now? Those fears were understandable, but thankfully they were not the truth. Looking back, I can see healing was still happening beneath the surface. It simply wasn't finished yet. The return of joy. One of the most surprising parts of recovery was realizing that the positive emotions took longer to return. Fear, anger, grief, and sadness seemed to arrive first. Joy and positive emotions arrived later. At first, the changes were so subtle that I almost missed them. I would catch myself laughing at something. I would feel a brief moment of interest in something. I would notice a tiny spark of excitement about something in the future. Sometimes it was simply waking up and feeling slightly lighter than the day before. The changes weren't dramatic. They were quiet, but they kept happening. Over time, those small moments became more frequent. The sparks became stronger, the windows became longer. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally beginning to reconnect with myself and my life, learning a new way to care for myself. As the intensity of withdrawal gradually eased, another stage of healing began. I started to learn how to care for myself without antidepressants. I became curious about my emotions rather than trying to suppress them. I started exploring what they were trying to tell me. I invested time in therapy, nervous system support, rest, sleep, nutrition, connection, creativity, spirituality, purpose, and self-understanding. I learned that many different things influence mental health. It is shaped by our relationships, our environment, our lifestyle, our stress levels, our beliefs, our physical well-being, our past experiences and conditioning, and the way we respond to ourselves during difficult times. For the first time in my life, I started building a relationship with myself that wasn't based on trying to eliminate difficult emotions, but instead learning how to listen, understand, and support them. What I would say to someone feeling this way: if someone came to me today and told me they had come off antidepressants but still felt depressed, emotionally numb, or unable to experience joy, the first thing I would say is this: be gentle with yourself. I know how frightening it is when happiness feels out of reach. I know how convincing it can feel when your mind starts telling you that this is who you are now, or that you'll never feel happy again. Before jumping to conclusions, I would encourage you to honestly ask yourself one question: how much time have you truly allowed for healing? If withdrawal could still be playing a role, then patience and self-compassion become incredibly important. Healing from antidepressant withdrawal can take far longer than many of us are led to believe, especially after long-term use. If more healing time is needed, I would focus less on trying to force yourself to feel better and more on asking how you can support your nervous system whilst it recovers. That support might come through coping strategies, mindset work, reducing unnecessary stress, improving boundaries, nourishing your body, prioritizing rest, seeking connection, spending time in nature, engaging with creativity, finding community, or simply learning how to be gentler with yourself. In my own case, this process took years. It didn't happen overnight. It was a commitment I made to myself to keep going, to keep learning, and to keep finding ways to support my healing no matter how long it took. However, if you genuinely feel that withdrawal is no longer driving what you're experiencing, then I would encourage you to ask a different question. Are you listening to your emotions, or are you trying to silence them? What are they trying to tell you? Because in my experience, emotions are rarely random. They often point towards something that needs our attention. Perhaps something in your life needs to change. Perhaps something is missing. Perhaps there is grief that needs processing, stress that needs addressing, boundaries that need strengthening, or needs that have gone unmet for too long. We are often taught to fear difficult emotions, suppress them, distract ourselves from them, or view them purely as symptoms to be removed. Yet emotions can also be messengers. When we slow down enough to listen, they often reveal what needs more care, attention, or honesty. That doesn't mean everyone's journey will look the same, and it certainly doesn't mean I have all the answers. What I do know from my own experience is that no drug could change my circumstances, heal old wounds, improve my relationships, create purpose, bring meaningful connection into my life, help me rest, spend time in nature, nurture my body, or teach me how to understand myself. Those things I had to learn and build for myself. Today I still experience sadness, stress, overwhelm, and difficult emotions because I'm human. Life still brings challenges and always will. But alongside those harder emotions, there is joy, there is contentment, there is hope, there is purpose. Most importantly, there is a trust in my ability to care for myself through whatever life brings, supported by the many tools, coping strategies, insights, and lessons that withdrawal and healing have taught me along the way. I am incredibly grateful that I didn't give up on myself when those fears were at their loudest, because they never came true. The happiness I thought I'd lost forever did return, not all at once, not overnight, but little by little, until one day I realized I was no longer simply surviving, I was finally living again. My final thoughts: if you're struggling to believe that things can improve, perhaps you don't need to create hope from scratch. Perhaps for now, you can borrow some of mine. For many years, I borrowed hope from those who had walked this path before me. Eventually, that borrowed hope became my reality. Healing didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't linear, but the joy I feared I'd lost forever slowly found its way back. If you're walking this path too, please know that you're not alone. I created the resources I wish I'd had during my own withdrawal journey. Through my memoir, Swallowed Whole, and the resources available through the Antidepressant Withdrawal Haven, my hope is simply to help others feel seen, understood, and a little less alone while finding their own way forward. Sometimes, the first sign of healing is not feeling happy again. Sometimes, it's simply finding enough hope to believe that happiness may one day return. Just a gentle reminder, everything I share is based on my lived experience and should not replace professional medical advice. I don't claim to have all the answers, and I know everyone's journey is unique. I can only share what I experienced, what I learned, and what ultimately helped me find my way through. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and always honor your own experience.